from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell, back at my home in London after quite a while away, Australia, then New Zealand, and then last week I was speaking to you from Birmingham because I was working on the big dog show, Crufts. Jim, I know you've got a vested interest in the dogs. A Lagotto Romagnolo won Best in Show. That's an Italian dog, originally a duck hunter, but now truffle hunter. Although, of course, you know, can't bring truffles in to sway the judges. It's all about appearance and performance on the day. But it was quite the educational experience. However, nice to be back at home again now.
Jim Maxwell melting in Sydney. We're up to around 35, 40 in the last couple of days. It's a meltdown. But I must say, the last 2 weeks, I've really enjoyed the cricket from New Zealand. England went down by 1 run. And then, while the test match, I have to say, in Ahmedabad, more than good, fizzled because of a moribund surface and some bloody-minded batting from Khawaja and then Kohli to make sure wickets didn't fall. We had an extraordinary game finishing in almost the dark in Christchurch at Hagley Oval, and with a result by 2 wickets off the last ball. So Test cricket's well and truly alive in New Zealand, but it petered out in India. Anyway, Charu would be pleased to know that we're going to have the final game of the series at the Oval in a couple of months, aren't we?
Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, the two best teams in the world. Sorry, Alison, but a pity about that last Test match. I'm glad everybody's back home, so am I. Charu Sharma for All India Radio. I'd been for a trek to the Himalayas, a thoroughly enjoyable trek, even though it snowed a bit too much on the penultimate day on our way up. And considering our average age of about the mid-60s, we wisely decided to retreat. So we didn't quite reach our final objective, but collected some fine memories. And on the way down, I actually caught a bit of that Test match, including, of course, a fair amount of the continuing Women's Premier League, which is finally gaining a fair amount of media traction here in India. I don't know about the rest of the world, though.
Now, after a wait of over 3 years and over 1,000 days, would you believe it, Virat Kohli finally scored a century in a Test match. He hit a superb 186 as India ensured that they won their series against Australia, having already retained the Border Gavaskar trophy. The series did finish 2-1 to India. The team's now also confirmed, as Jim mentioned earlier, to be facing off in the World Test Championship in England in June. Now, Charu, Kohli's hit centuries in ODI and T20 cricket recently as well. But, you know, he's now got that one in a Test match in the bag. Does that mean the pressure's off him a little bit? Because he's had a bit of a tough few years, hasn't he?
Oh, he has. I mean, there's so much criticism because for the last 3 years or so, he just was not among the runs, and certainly not substantial runs. A little knock here, a little knock there, not quite Kohli-esque. So, yeah, this near double century, and I say that because he just ran out of partners and then went for a big slog and got caught. But the 200 was there really for him. I think it will lift a fair amount of pressure on him, but I think he's tough enough to have withstood the pressure. It's more the rest of the cricketing community who now can all collectively breathe a sigh of relief, because there was a fair murmur about the fact that he was nowhere near his best and he was struggling like all the rest of the greats at times. Sachin too struggled, as we all know, to get his 100th 100. And Kohli here, a 3-year lean drought. That's big for any player. And if he hadn't been as big a player, I'm not so sure any other player would have gotten that kind of long rope. But we're all glad he did.
Yeah, class is permanent. It sometimes goes away for a while, leaves you, but then it so often comes back, doesn't it? Jim, let's have a listen to what you had to say here on Stumped last week.
Their number one batsman in terms of numbers bats at 9, Axel Patel. I mean, their batting, it's looked very ordinary. I know the Australians have had their collapses, but the top 6 from India haven't put in.
Have you had to change your tune a bit now with Virat Kohli?
Well, if ever there was a man on a mission, it was Virat Kohli. It was an innings of unbelievable denial. Even going into the 4th day, I think it took him a couple of hours to hit a boundary on that day when he resumed his innings. But he played superbly. So it was a very committed, determined performance, and good on him.
In the early part of Kohli's career, it was a similar situation where he'd score a few runs, and then in an attempt to, can I use the word, bully the attack, he used to sort of play an uppish shot to mid-off, mid-on, and get caught. I think he kind of turned the clock back a bit and once again said, well, I'm not going to do that. As Jim alluded, he played very, very safe along the ground cricket. And maybe that was always the magic formula to make sure that you don't get out, because on a pitch like that, runs will come, and they did.
Yeah, just value your wicket and keep your head down, keep the ball along the ground, concentrate. Jim, as much as we'd love to say that you were directly responsible for jinxing it, the surface in Ahmedabad was pretty lifeless, wasn't it?
If you're going to condemn a pitch, as they did previously, for being a poor surface for Test cricket, well, you've got to be consistent. This was a poor surface for Test cricket because it did not give bowler and batsman an equal opportunity. This pitch deserved condemnation, particularly after the first 3 tests went so quickly. But perhaps the other side of that is we need to be a little bit more forgiving in this 4th game of the series because, as I mentioned, there were 2 batsmen hell-bent on not making a mistake. And that was a big factor.
I mean, what about, Charu, if we look ahead to the Oval, because it will be India-Australia once again. So given, what we've seen in Indian conditions, though, how do you think that's going to translate? And how big a chance do you give India against Australia in English conditions?
Well, it's going to be chalk and cheese for sure, or 180, because in Indian conditions, the way the Indian spinners operated, I don't think they're going to get anywhere close to that in terms of the surface in England. So just theoretically, or should we say, speaking with the knowledge that we have right now in terms of resources, if Australia have their premier fast bowling attack, then we'll have to give that test match to Australia, because June is not quite July, August in England, so the conditions are still sort of seeming. And I don't think the Indians are going to enjoy the cold either. So if the pitch is not going to take spin, if the fast bowlers are going to rule the roost, then Australia have a better complement of fast bowlers. And especially with Bumrah, with his mystery injury, now getting treatment in New Zealand, clearly India's lead bowler. I think India are going to suffer in that department, which, to my mind, is the most important department when you play a test match, and a one-off test match in England in June.
Yeah, it's that ability to take 20 wickets rather to win a test match, 10 in each innings. Yeah. Yep, we're just getting my maths right. Jim, what do you want to see from Australia moving from India through to, as you said, sort of the final match of this series, if you can stretch it out across the 2 countries?
Well, the most important thing in terms of bowling is the return of Pat Cummins, who, of course, as everyone knows, has been staying back in Australia following the untimely, unfortunate death of his mother. And he's been with family as he is through this one-day series about to come up. So he's the best fast bowler in the world. So that's important. The other side is, will they pick Warner to open? What are they going to do there? Does it depend on what he does in his one-day series as to whether he survives? So they've got a bit to pick up with their batting, as some of the top-order Indian players have to as well, other than Kohli. And Nathan Lyon's clearly in stupendous form. So it's a bit hard to read. It could be one of those games where you win the toss and you lose because you decide to bat and the pitch is at its freshest on the first day and does a bit.
Let me also quickly add the importance of the IPL, because already I think Rohit has mentioned that the teams that don't make it to the latter stages of the IPL, well, the players who play for India from those teams will be allowed to go to England early, which is a very good move. But may I dare suggest that the IPL, with its intensity of action and just so much at stake, I wonder eventually who's going to be available to play for India, because already injuries are playing such an important part for international cricket. And let me assure you, no IPL team is going to allow a little niggle to come in the way of performance. So I think these guys are going to be giving 100 and whatever, I mean, mathematically only 100%, but more for all the IPL matches. And I wonder if that's just going to be something that adds a little bit of, well, confusion and mystery about who eventually is going to turn up for India in England for the World Test Championship, which is pretty important. I mean, India played the first one, lost to New Zealand. But even India, and the other nations where Test match cricket may not be so heavily valued, sorry, Jim, I think still do consider one match as a World Championship match to have a lot of significance.
I think the biggest challenge facing all the teams is just staying fit, isn't it? For the volume of cricket, for the lack of recovery time in between, whether it's T20 in the IPL League into the Test Championship, into the Ashes, just keep your players as fit as you can, because there's a lot of cricket to get through.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Now on Stumped, it's been 2 months since members of the Afghanistan women's cricket team made it publicly known that they were in Melbourne, Australia. They fled Afghanistan when the Taliban took over, fearing for their safety as sport became banned for women. They wrote to the ICC back in December to seek to clarify their status and to find out what's happened to the funds that go to the Afghanistan Cricket Board that's meant to be for their pay and development. And they received a reply from the chief executive a month later saying it's up to the Afghanistan Cricket Board to decide how it allocates its funding. It was promised that their letter would be discussed at the ICC's next board meeting, which is now next week. Over a year ago, the ICC set up an Afghanistan working group to advise the ICC on the best way through the Afghanistan situation. I've been speaking to one of the players, 18-year-old Firooza Afghan, and I began by asking if anyone from that working group has been in touch with the women since they left the country.
Unfortunately, no one. We have not received any call from ICC and ACB. I really don't understand why they don't want to speak with us. It's our right to know about our future team, and they don't accept us an Afghanistan players. I don't know why, because now we are in Australia. They don't accept us from Afghanistan national team.
So the ICC have said that they have been discussing the Afghanistan situation. Indeed, they set up the Afghanistan working group. They have another board meeting on Monday, the 20th of March. What do you want to come out of that board meeting?
We want them to make a fair decision. For first time, it's possible they make a fair decision for us, because it's our right to play for our country. For Afghanistan, it doesn't matter where we live. The important thing is that we are still fighting for have a team here. The player of Afghanistan in here, why ICC don't allow us to play for Afghanistan?
The ICC, I believe, would say that it's a decision for the Afghanistan Cricket Board. I know they responded in such fashion to the letter that you wrote to them in December. In that letter, you ask for funding that goes to the Afghanistan Cricket Board that is meant to support a women's team as part of Afghanistan's test status. You ask if some of those funds could be withheld from the ACB and instead the ICC direct them to support you, the Afghanistan women in Melbourne. Is that still a wish collectively of the group of you that are in Australia?
Yeah, if in Afghanistan it's not possible to make a team, we want this in Australia for all Afghan girls, because everyone has this right to play cricket. Also, Afghanistan girls has this right to play cricket. It's impossible to make a team in Afghanistan. We want a team here.
And you need some financial support from that, presumably, and you hope that would come from the ICC?
Yes, of course, we want also this in here, because all of team have this, and also we want this here.
So Firooza, can you tell me your story? How did you travel from Afghanistan to Melbourne?
When Taliban came in Herat city, me and my part of my family, we went to Kabul and waiting for our visa. And I think 3 months we waiting our visa. Finally, we got it, our visa. Unfortunately, my family, they don't have passports. It's really a big problem. We went to Pakistan illegally, and Pakistan government don't allow my family for flight, because they said you are illegally in Pakistan. And 9 months we wait in Pakistan. I'm the last player in Pakistan, because everyone here, my teammates, Emma and Miss Catherine, everyone wait for me here. And 9 months, me and my family was in Pakistan. And finally, we got allowed to have a flight, and finally I can.
So tell me about your cricket now, Firooza. What cricket are you playing and what ambitions do you have?
cricket is very important for me because I grew up with cricket, and here also I play cricket with local teams, and we have a competition, and I hope one day I can play for Afghanistan and also play for BBL. I love Renegade's team, and I hope this happen one day.
Well, that was Firooza Afghan, one of the 22 women who were contracted to the Afghanistan Cricket Board before the Taliban took over the country. I met up with Firooza and a number of the other women when I was in Melbourne. We went for ice cream together, and so many of them do have extraordinary stories of their passage into Australia. Now, it does seem extraordinary that nobody from the ICC Afghanistan Working Group has sought to personally engage with the very group affected by the Taliban takeover. It was clear in the letter that the ICC did write back to the women. They say it's up to the ACB how they allocate their funding. It certainly could be argued, however, that it's up to the ICC how they allocate their funding. And if a full member isn't able to support a national women's team, which is a requirement of test status, then there would be a strong argument, you would think, for the ICC to whether it's withholding a proportionate amount or simply not allocating as much as they did before, but having funds to then redirect towards this group of women who are in Australia who do want to further and develop their own cricket, whether under an official banner of Afghanistan or not. But that ICC meeting is on Monday, and we will follow developments closely here on Stumped. Well, that's all we've got time for this week on Stumped on All India Radio. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter. We're at BBCWS Sport and use the hashtag BBC Stumped. And check us out on YouTube too. Go to BBC World Service's YouTube channel. My thanks to Charu, Sharma and Jim Maxwell, and to all of you for listening. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.